Okay, we're now back in session. We'll go back up to the top of our agenda where we left off, which was the county administrator monthly report.
Sure, I can keep it brief. I just have it in there, just in terms of all the project updates. If there's any questions, I can take that. If not, I will just, I guess, continue on. Just under the, again, we just been putting under just under the COVID-19. It's been a quiet month in terms of anything that we're doing. I don't know. I know Dan was not available. Let me just check, make sure he's on or not. Okay. I know Sue's available. Sue, if you're available, I'm going to unmute you if you want to provide an update, Sue.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Gosh, Ken, I had to smile when you said it's been a quiet month as far as COVID's concerned, not from our point of view.
Sorry.
Fortunately, our case numbers remain stable and low. Right now, we're at 40 confirmed cases of COVID in Door County residents. That's just up 5 from last month at the county board meeting. We've had the 3 deaths. Currently, there are 2 people hospitalized for COVID and 34 have recovered. The public health strategy.
Mr. Chairman, I think that it's not being rebroadcast through this system because I can hear it, but it's very low.
Yeah, so could you try and get closer to the speaker? We can't hear you well.
Are we using that mic to retransmit?
Oh, there you go.
Okay, that's what it was.
Is this any better?
Ooh,
yeah. Okay.
Technology job here.
How's this? I don't want to be too loud.
Oh, great.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Our public health strategy locally, as well as from the state, remains testing and contact tracing to contain the virus. Currently in Door County, we're averaging about 15 tests done per day, up to maybe 40. The majority of those are done by Door County Medical Center, but Aurora is also testing in Sturgeon Bay, and Aurora and Bellin are testing in Green Bay. We've also had some people go to the community testing site in Brown County when it was up and running. So that counts in our case numbers too. We are effectively able to keep up with the contact tracing also. So as far as Door County public health operations, we continue to function. Obviously, 7 days a week, we need to be able to respond to anything case-wise on the weekends. We do have 2 limited term employee staff who are contact tracers. One is an RN working 32 hours a week remotely, and the other person just started a week and a half ago, still orienting. She has a social work background. She'll be able to work 20 to 40 hours a week. Our other LTE public health nurse, Mary Ellen Smith, who is 2 days a week, came back twice out of retirement and is retiring again. Today is her last day. We have very much appreciated her assistance and her wealth of experience and knowledge. And we'll miss her. I anticipate that the contact tracing LTE positions will be able to be completely funded by the special COVID grant funding that was recently put through from the state, just so you know about the funding for that. And for the weekends, the LTEs are able to cover some of the time, but even when they're doing the actual work, we have designated key staff members to be on call as backup. And we've been rotating this responsibility. Public health staff has really appreciated that recently it was arranged that staff members who are salaried and do weekend on call work can receive a call stipend as others in health and human services do for being on call. This week, the big community focus has begun to be the schools. Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, you may be aware, released their 80-page guideline document yesterday. This is a huge undertaking for schools. As anticipated, the guidelines are really broad, mainly topics to consider, and there are so many considerations for schools, such as whether they'll do in-person school, how they will distance, masking, virtual learning. how to switch back and forth from in-person to virtual learning should the need arise, how to cohort students, busing, and how to equitably address the needs of students and staff. So we will support the schools along with the school nurses, and our pediatrician, Dr. Amy Fogarty, has been involved. We'll assist them as much as possible, but I want to be really clear here. The decisions about how each school district opens rests with the school district. Public health has no authority over schools regarding this. And then going forward, determinations in the event of outbreaks to close school buildings, that type of thing, will be a decision jointly made between public health and the school districts. We'll be in consultation and work together. We will be meeting with the schools on Thursday to begin discussion about this. And I bring it up mostly because schools are going to truly need the support of our entire community going through this. We continue to keep in close communication with long-term care facilities because there are vulnerable populations, and assist them as needed and provide personal protective equipment from through emergency management from the strategic national stockpile. Of course, we continue to work closely with Dan Kane, Emergency Management, and Door County Medical Center. Specifically with Door County Medical Center, we continue to be involved in the town hall meetings that are every other Wednesday afternoon. Door County Medical Center hosts those. And we continue with the every other week Facebook Live presentations. Looking at the broader picture, Badger Bounce Back is still in operation, so to speak. And Department of Health Services is going to be putting out more metrics by county, including burden of disease and trajectory. I believe they're going to publicize that later this week. Health officers have had a chance to look at the preliminaries. And it's interesting, but for Door County, with our low numbers, stable numbers, we know everything is pretty much a green light for our particular county. So the metrics are there, but are not that helpful at this point with our small numbers. And it's been suggested by some that we only focus on our local situation, not so much at the state and national picture. But if we do that, I really believe we'd be ignoring that we have about 2 million visitors here each summer. Half of them are from across Wisconsin. So, really keeping an eye on the trends across the state. There have been some outbreaks in localities, and I'm told that today La Crosse announced they had an outbreak of around 20. And they're announcing certain high-risk locations in the La Crosse area. I know that Winnebago County recently had an increase of cases in the 20-ish-year-olds that frequent bars. And the thinking there is there's no, lack of social distancing in those situations. So a really hot topic for us has been large gatherings. I want to be sure our guidance has not changed as far as the risk of community gatherings. Gatherings of 10 to 50 people are still considered high risk, and we are still advising that gatherings of 50 or more are simply not advisable. The CDC last week updated their verbiage on this, and they focused more on the situation than the numbers. And they point out that the more people an individual interacts with at a gathering, and the longer that interaction lasts, the higher the potential risk of becoming infected with COVID and of COVID spreading. They also talk about that the higher the level of community transmission in the area that the gathering is being held, the higher the risk. So for that particular metric, we're in good shape because obviously we've had little spread recently. Part of the discussion is always, isn't outdoor gatherings more safe than indoor? There is nothing that I have read nor nothing from the CDC that says that. They talk about risk again, and they mention outdoor gatherings. More risk is outdoor gatherings in person with individuals from different households that come from the same local area. Higher risk is outside the local area, and highest risk is large gatherings with people from outside the local area. So of course, that has a lot of implications for Door County. And I do know that there are some plans for large gatherings in our county, which of course go against our guidance. As I explained last month, I think our follow-ups have become increasingly more complicated. People, of course, are not staying home as they were at the beginning of all this. People are moving around, going to work, visiting more venues, have more contacts. And then in the past week with our follow-ups, we've had people begin to tell us simply no, they don't want to quarantine, or they don't believe us. And thus far, we've worked around these replies, but it's become very challenging. And I'm aware that the general trend across the nation, as far as the CDC and the state and the local public health, simply are not as respected as they were and have become, guidance has become controversial and political. And I'm feeling a general apathy. And I hear that same comment from my counterparts across the state in meetings with them. So we're all in the most challenging time, I believe, how to resume activities and keep the risk low. And everyone just wants to get back to normal. And trust me, no one wants this more than me. Our numbers are encouraging, but we're not out of this yet. And I'm tired of this expression, but the situation remains fluid and it's unfolding. And the science-based tools we have at present are masking, social distancing, and hand washing. And, these are the only tools we have. We really need to stay the course. And that's my pitch to respectfully appeal to you as leaders in our community to support these science-based measures. And that's all I had for my update. I'm happy to take any questions.
Susan?
I have three. One is, people are asking me how many of the people who have been infected in our county have been served in our hospital as opposed to in Green Bay. Do you want me to just do all three and then you can answer that after that, or?
I can. How about if I take them one at a time, if you don't mind? So that one, oh my gosh. I can think of only one individual that was hospitalized in Green Bay. In general, our hospital has all the capabilities to treat people here, especially with telemedicine. They can consult experts in, places like Green Bay. And, I would be guessing if I said anything about why the one person was in Green Bay hospitalized.
Can you give us a ballpark as to how many our hospital has served?
I'm sorry, how many our hospital can serve?
Has served till now?
Oh my goodness, let's see. Under five or under, Susan.
Okay, the second question is just with the guidelines that you issued, I'm wondering what kind of feedback you're getting from businesses, or if you are getting any feedback from businesses in the community with how they're doing the guidelines and compliance and whatever.
Yeah, that is a really good question, and they have not expressed particular difficulties, at least to me. They are very enthusiastic about endorsing the guidelines and the signage, and all of that, to keep their business safe.
Okay. And the last thing is, for a while, we were hearing from people who wanted us to have a mask ordinance. And then we talked about it, and then I didn't hear anymore. Now I'm starting to get emails about that again. And some of them are pointing to communities around the nation that are, whether they're actually putting them in place or whether it's just being reported that they're putting things in place. And I'm just wondering what you're hearing or what you think about all of that.
Good point. I am getting those same emails. And I find it interesting that there are a lot of states who have adopted that measure as a state. And that would really make it a lot easier. I've heard comments that people from Illinois find it nice that they don't have to mask here, whereas in Illinois they do. I'm not sure how it's going in any of the communities as far as enforcement, how that really works out.
Vinny?
Okay, I also have three. I'll take them one by one. Thank you. First, just thank you so much for everything the public health department's doing. This is something I'm sure you couldn't even imagine the amount of work that it's taking. And the question that I have about contact tracing is, does the health department have the resources, or are they already in the process of, let's say someone is visiting and they return home and they test positive for COVID, are their health departments contacting you if they've identified that they've been in your county within the last X number of days or time? Like, are you on the receiving side of the contact tracing from other counties as visitors return home and test positive? Or has it happened?
So, Vinny, that is exactly how the system is set up to work. Having said that, we've only communicated with Brown County in that regard. There's no way to know if that situation has occurred, that somebody went home and got diagnosed and we weren't notified. And let's keep in mind that each situation is different. If somebody came here, I don't know, and they really just took to themselves, stayed at perhaps an RV, and were, very vigilant about distancing and all of that, that would come out with whoever does the contact tracing. And then if there were no actual close contacts of concern here, there would be no reason to notify us.
Okay. Thank you. The second part of the question is, I guess if you could, maybe you can't clarify this, but just the concept of the masking in locations inside and outside. And then I did hear about La Crosse County also identifying places where they had outbreaks. And one of those they identified, unfortunately, what I believe was beaches. And they talked about how they might have to limit number of people on beaches. That's probably not a popular question or discussion, but I guess it's just, is it on your radar for the future, but our cases are low, so not now? Thank you.
So I'm not sure your question, Vinny, is, are beaches on the radar?
I guess, yes, that would sum it up. I mean, maybe not because our numbers are low. I guess I'm just looking at things you might consider or maybe are not considering for the future. That's been a big thing people have contacted me about, is not just beaches, but like crowds of people gathering outdoors where they don't be a crowd, but that's just kind of the nature of small tourist towns.
So all of that is really on the public health radar and greatly concerns us. So take, for example, the beaches. It would go by who has jurisdiction over that beach, whether it's a state beach, a municipality beach. It would be up to those folks to enforce or put out exactly what they'd like to have happen there. We've had some questions from municipalities about how to best do that. We advise signage. That only goes so far. past that, it's really tough. This is a tough situation. And as I said earlier, I'm aware of some large community gatherings planned to take place in Door County, and I fear it a lot because I think when there's one or two, then it's going to be a domino effect. Okay, that happened, and let's plan our, now our festival can take place, or whatever it is, our parade, our picnic. And what I have in mind is, if, let's say there is a large gathering, and then we find that there's cases from that has a little teeth to it to publicize that. But past that, I'm not sure of a better strategy proactively than what we have, recommendations and guidelines.
Thank you. The last part of the question I have is, I'm also hearing of other counties having more drive-up services for like the typical public health department vaccines. And so I'm just wondering if you have reflection on what public health things, and this is no criticism, it's just a situation, but cannot happen because there's so much time spent with COVID. And if there's ways that we can support your department in, organizing things differently so some of those services can continue into the future. Thank you.
Yeah, a good question, Vinny. Thanks. So one of the services that's continued is WIC, and that's totally virtually. And that will continue virtually through July, and past that it's up to the federal and state WIC guidelines to determine if that's okay, or the next step in their plan would be to have minimal contact with people. We are anticipating within the next month opening up to immunizations, and that would be strictly scheduled, and we would, not want more than one family in our waiting room at a time, and that sort of thing. And we would try to do all our talking out in a larger area rather than in the small immunization room. We do, one of the things we've done is postpartum visits by phone, which certainly isn't as valuable as visiting the home, but the people, the families we've done that with really appreciate it. So we continue with that.
Thank you.
Nissa?
Thank you. So yesterday, I don't know if anyone else has seen this, the Washington Post had an article about what's happening, not exactly with COVID and as such, but what's happening to the public health people. For instance, Georgia's public health director, I have the article up right now, that she has said last month that she receives threats daily, now has an armed escort. Pennsylvania's Secretary of Health is transgender and has had her life threatened and been told that she's just a man in a dress. 4 public health officials in Colorado have left their jobs recently due to, various either threats or just when they make a recommendation, they're told that they can't do that. Sue, I just want to thank you for what you've done. I mean, I'm sure most of us have seen comments on social media from either locals or tourists or the public in general, about the public health department in the county, in the state, or you by name in particular. Which I want to remind the community that everyone in public health is an actual person, that, it wasn't that long ago that the biggest thing we talked about in public health was that chlamydia was rampant in the county for, a younger age group. And now, you're doing a job that you realistically didn't sign up for. So I just wanted to publicly thank you for what you've done.
Thank you so much, Nissa. And For what it's worth, I've stopped reading social media comments because I don't know, because it's.
Which is probably smart.
And early on in all of this, our sheriff came to me and said if I should have any concerns about personal safety in myself or my staff to, they're there for us. So, and I really appreciated that thought. I don't think it'll come to that. Hopefully people recognize this is just my job, and it's not, something personal about Sue.
David?
Thank you. This event has been rather an interesting thing to observe across the world. We have individuals whose professional job is based on and trained based on doing whatever their job is correctly. And we hear these various comments about threats and that. It wasn't too long ago that we heard our country going nuts because a small group of individuals were not vaccinating their kids against mumps. And those were the victims. Those were the people that were being picked on for not doing that. Now we have professionals in their career going in for 30, 40 years that are being harassed and feel they need to use the words science-based decision-making. And that's rather disappointing to see in our country heading that way. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Any other questions for Sue? No more questions, Sue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, then just going on, the one thing we did add on the agenda is obviously for our orientation, we did not, just because of all the things that happened with COVID, we weren't able to do like a full-blown orientation. So what we're going to do is this each month, maybe we'll try to grab a topic. And I asked Grant actually to put this together. It's under my report, but I'm actually going to turn it over to Grant. I just wanted Grant is to cover some materials. Mainly, we're going to cover today is this, a lot of the stuff related to communications and roles, just so you're comfortable. And obviously, with everyone coming on board, we got hit with a lot of communications and everything coming in. So I thought Grant could just take a few minutes and kind of cover that for us. Grant?
Certainly Ken can chime in if I go astray. I'm going to try to be quick here because I know we're taking up a lot of time. Good morning, first of all. The materials in the packet are on page 14 to 19. And what I will start off with is an understanding of counties themselves. Counties are, you'll hear me say, if you stick around long enough, that counties are creatures of statute. What that means quite literally is that the counties only have the power that is vested to them by the state through the statutes and only have the responsibilities that are imposed upon them by the state through the statutes. Nothing more, nothing less. So we have to look to the statutes for the source of both our powers and our responsibilities. Turning to the materials themselves, I think the last sentence in the material sums up what I'm going to talk about today nicely is the modern county board has evolved into a legislative and policy setting body. And that, for maybe looking at Dan Osted, among other people who has been here long enough to remember when the county board basically ran the county and did not only the policy setting and legislative enactments, but also the day-to-day operation. That is no longer the case. Currently, counties have three options under the statutes to organize their administration. One is through a county executive, two is through a county administrator, and three is through an administrative coordinator. We have obviously selected the county administrator model and have been operating in that manner for quite a number of years. In essence, what that means is the day-to-day operations of the county is left to the discretion and judgment of the county administrator, subject to the broad policy and legislative enactments made by the county board. In terms of the county board itself, there's only two ways that the county board can act as a body. The supervisors really have no authority or discretion by themselves. They have to act through the various committees, committees, and ultimately the board. And at the end of the day, the county board can only act in two ways. One, through the adoption of a resolution, or two, the enactment of an ordinance. And pretty much everything we do flows from a resolution that was adopted or an ordinance that's been enacted over the years. And that's not in any way to diminish your roles. Your roles are very important, but what I'm trying to do is establish kind of the sideboards of administration versus legislative and policy functions. Also in the materials, and this is, I will say, is unique to Wisconsin, having lived in other parts of the country many, many years ago. There are other elected officials within county government that are referred to as constitutional or statutory officers. And I'm going to have to put on my glasses to make sure I don't miss somebody. But they start with the sheriff, the clerk of circuit court, the register of deeds, our county clerk, our county treasurer, and the district attorney. Because these officers are elected and because their duties are set forth in statute, the county board has no ability to micromanage the affairs of those departments under those officers. In very simplistic terms, where the county board can influence those constitutional or statutory officers is in the checkbook. The county board has control over the budget and certain broad policy and legislative enactments, but the day-to-day operations of those departments that are overseen by the constitutional and statutory officers are left to the discretion and judgment of those constitutional officers and statutory officers. And we're a little bit unique in that. In Wisconsin and many other states, those officers' positions have been replaced by appointed officials. I'm an example of an appointed official. Corporation counsel is a statutorily created appointment or position, but it's subject to appointment by the county board, not by an election. And there's many of those within the county. I'm not going to go into detail on those. Ken had mentioned also the communications. We're going to give a little bit of a greater presentation on public records and open meetings and how that impacts communications. But generally speaking, you now have two identities, and I'm speaking to the county board of supervisors that were just elected. You have your private personal self, and you have yourself as an elected official. And it's really difficult to parse those two. So what I strongly recommend is that if you're communicating on county business, that you use county equipment and county software. Primarily that involves our email. We do have some Facebook accounts. We do have some other social media accounts, but I think the primary means of communication obviously are going to be face-to-face, telephone calls, but if it's going to be in writing, go to the good old-fashioned letter, which I know some of our supervisors do, or email. What you want to avoid doing is using your personal email accounts, your personal social media accounts to talk about county business, because where that's going to have an implication is in the public records side of things. Because any record that is created that relates to county business by a county employee, an appointed official, an elected official, has to be retained for a minimum period of 7 years. And it is presumptively subject to inspection and disclosure to the public. Case law has developed in this area where the Wisconsin Supreme Court has said, yes, you have the ability to sift and sort and separate out that which is purely personal from that which might be deemed to be county-related business. What I'm telling you, though, is you don't want to have somebody like me or Ken or appointed outside counsel go through your personal email accounts, go through your personal Twitter accounts, go through your Facebook page, and try to figure out what is personal and what might be business related. So the easiest way to parse that is to do it yourself. If you're engaging in communications, use your county email account. Those of you, and I don't know if any of you have county issued phones, you may or may not, but try to avoid using the texting function on your personal phone. If you use it, do what I do, because sometimes it's unavoidable. You take a screenshot of whatever you texted, email it to your county email account. And I'm sure as the folks in our technology services department have explained, those emails, even if you delete them, are sent somewhere and saved for 7 years. So that's sort of my spiel for today. Sorry it wasn't longer, but as Ken indicated, what we're going to try to do is get you caught up, or maybe you're glad it wasn't so long, but try to get you caught up on the orientation we usually do, what we weren't able to do because of COVID-19 and the impact. So, any questions? Wait, David?
Yes, just a comment, a reminder that all of us will end up getting email contact through their personal emails. What I do is I forward that personal email to my county email and then respond from there rather than doing the response through the personal email, because people get a hold of those and use them.
Thank you, Grant. Any business and updates? Resolution 2020-19, declaration of state of emergency.
Sure. So this one is we're just putting on every month as far as an update. No action's really needed, but we still have our declaration of emergency. Dan is not able to be on the call, but we are still, I guess, having ours considered, I guess, active or still on the books, mainly because the state also has theirs, and all of our reimbursements, as you know, a lot of that stuff's coming out of the state now in terms of what we can qualify for reimbursements. That's all part of that being underneath that declaration of emergency. I can tell you that this month, as I mentioned, I know Sue said she teased me for things being quiet, but I guess I was saying quiet in terms of anything that we need to respond to in terms of emergency actions. For both David and myself, we've not, I guess, done any emergency authorizations. And in fact, most of the stuff now that if the timing's appropriate, I'm still trying to run that through the committee or the committee structure. So at this point in time, again, we still have it, I guess, the state of emergency in place. And I guess what we're trying to do is limit any types of actions that we take in terms of decision making, unless it's truly an emergency, or again, trying to follow through the proper procedure as far as the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ken, could you give an update briefly just on how things are going in the county building with employees? And then I also have a question about if we have any sense when the libraries might be open again.
Sure. So that's a great question. I could have gave that up above. So yes, so if you recall, I guess what we're considering our phase one all the way through June in terms of our reopening. And now starting the 29th, I guess we're phrasing it our phase two, but phase two might be a little bit longer just in terms of duration. But yes, everything in terms of our operations kind of returning back to normal in a sense from the public standpoint. But again, in terms of our operations, we're trying to, again, protect the employees or our operations where we think the density is too high. So each department is going through, and if they have the ability to, I guess, stagger their workforce, and a lot of people telecommute yet, we're still allowing that to occur starting in July. The expectation is that you work at least a minimum 50% of the time in the workplace or at your desk or wherever that might be. And again, the main purpose for that is, again, we have certain areas that have a higher density or interaction. So we're just trying to, again, if we can stagger it and make it safe, that's what our goal is. If we can have them work from home and still get work done, that's even better. I guess part of our goal in relation to that too is to work with Sue and public health. Again, as you know, it's going to vary. If there's an outbreak or something that occurs, obviously we would like to maintain ourselves in this fashion. Actually, throughout the rest of the year, in terms of being able to be, I guess, a little bit nimble in terms of being able to respond to this. Again, we're not sure what's going to happen during the summer or even getting into the fall, but at least at this point, we feel that we're in a position to react appropriately. So hopefully that answers your question.
Library.
The library, oh, sorry. Also going through the same plans, we have each one of the library and the branches are on a drop-off pickup service right now. Likewise, we're also going to start opening those up more in terms of being able to interact and go into the facility. I know Tina is online. I can have her give a brief update if you'd like. Tina, I have you unmuted. You want to just give a brief update on where you're on with your plans?
Sure. We are putting plans together right now to have limited access very soon, probably the week of July 6th is when we'll be putting this into place at each one of the branches. As I said, we're putting the plans together about how it's going to work at each one of the branches. So we're taking the next step forward. It's a small step, but we're still anticipating that we will be able to add more access as the month of July moves along. So very soon.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Kelly, next, the evaluation process review for the county administrator. If you recall last term, we had several questions about review process for the county administrator. We're coming up in that time period again in August, September. So included in the packet today is the evaluation as it was currently done with all the forms and questions. And Kelly, are you available? Oh, just come. Good morning.
Where would you like me to stand? Thank you. Good morning. Morning. So, did you want to go over the options first and then I can do the NEOGA review?
Yeah, let's do the options first. We'll go through the review portion.
Okay. So, in your packet on page 23, there are a few options. First one being leave the process the way it is now. Second being remove human resources altogether and bring in a consultant to work with the board and do the process from beginning to end. And then there's another option, which is kind of a combination, which would be to work with our current software program that we use for all the evaluations that we have for employees. So this program is called NeoGov. NeoGov is just, it's software, and we put the evaluation in there so we can create that evaluation however you want. It can be a set of goals, it can be a set of questions, and then there's an approval process. We can take the approval process, remove HR from that, and make it the consultant. So all of that would then be approved by the consultant. They would take the combination of scores and then present that to David. So that's it in a nutshell.
So the current process as performed last year.
Yep.
You review that.
Sure. So currently there are 3 different segments to the process. One is department heads fill out their evaluation and turn it back into HR. The county board completes their evaluation, turns it into HR, and then outside constituents complete and turn it into HR. I take a combination of all of the scores and then compile that and give that all of that information to David for review. It goes to administrative committee, and then they give a summary to the board.
And the information I get is I actually get the entire
Everything.
review pack from every individual. So I have all the comments and all the scores to read from everybody, the department heads, board members, and outside constituents. So that all gets compiled at my level. We'll take a look.
Right. In your packet, you have all of the current questions that are being asked of each of the different areas. That is what he gets, everything that's completed.
So there were some questions last year about whether we should alter or change the process. One idea was to remove HR from it. One idea was to put it on a software base, which is what she's referring to. Or the third option was to go ahead and compile all the information, but do it through an outside third party. So those are the options. So I'm not asking you to make any decisions today. I'm giving you the information so you can take a look at it. If you want to change questions or you think it should be changed somehow, that's what you need to come back to Kelly and I with. And over the next month or two, after we get that information, then we'll finalize how we will do the evaluation going forward for this year. Questions? Sure. Good, Vinny.
I guess my question, I'm just trying to refresh my memory because we haven't looked at this in a while, is I think was one of the reasons we were looking to make a change, correct me if I'm wrong, was what was the percentage of department heads and reply we had back from either county board and or department heads? And was that kind of impetus to look at doing something differently? And I'm not sure it was, but that's what I remember. Yes.
Yeah, that was correct.
Okay.
And there was some issue of do department heads or do other people feel comfortable answering the questions, knowing that potentially they're going to be reviewed by somebody other than myself or the administrative level. So.
Thank you.
Okay, Laura.
My question, just to clarify, so on our page 23 of our packet, there states 4A and 4B as 2 options, not a few options. But Kelly, you did mention that there was 3 options, and I think even our chairman Leno had referred to 3. So status quo, remove HR and hire a consultant, but there's a third one where it could just be the NeoGov.
Which is how.
So it'd be a combination.
Right, so the NeoGov is what's currently being used in the building or through the county process for other than Ken's level.
Okay,
right. Is that correct?
Just wanted to clarify that from what we have on our
We use
packet.
NeoGov for all of our employees.
David.
Is the NeoGov the review of the employees? Or is it a review process used for other functions that the employees are, fill out the questionnaire?
If I understand your question, how it works is it's a 2-part. So it's developed so that the employee goes in and they do a review of themselves. And then
So
they
it's for their
score
employment
themselves.
review.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
For their performance.
Right. Okay. A few years back, we did I believe it was done by Survey Monkey, a rather extensive report. I remember quite detailed on the county operation, and I remember that we had a rather strong response, and even the third-party entity thought they was quite impressed with the percentage of people that actually responded. Part of that was because it was a third party, and that's part of the reason why I brought this up in reference to thinking that nothing against your department, but there is the perceived concern. And that's why this was brought up. This NeoGov would be essentially similar to that.
So the whole idea is that we can take me a thought about it. The whole idea is you can set up the questions. All we do is you set it up, you set up the delegations to it. You can set up 2 ways. One is that anything that the people put in, they go in, and you can have that where Kelly does not review it. It goes directly to David, and David can go into the system and look at it. Or you could have it set up where Kelly can see them and compile them. She can't change them, but she can compile them and give them to them. So the third option is that if you don't feel that David could, compile them or print them out, you could also have a consultant have access and they do the same thing. But the whole idea is that system could, in essence, automate. It's really called the 360 review. So you automate your department heads. They go in, whatever final questions that you have set up for them, they do theirs. County board would do theirs, and then your external review would provide their input. They're all compiled and they're available within the NeoGov software. It's the evaluation software.
And then you set up who has access to it. The same group of individuals that would do. Okay. That being said, we can't broaden that out. There wasn't a paper version being able to respond to that. People are looking to separate themselves. How do they log in to actually do the entry? And again, coming back to that security interest, I don't want you to know that I entered the data.
I don't.
It has to be set up after your login. So for the supervisors, you go in, you'd have a login, you go in and you do it.
So regardless, that report would not be anonymous. It would be connected to a name.
Right.
Okay. Is this in response to our closed session motion that was made after the closed session then? Or is this just an annual review of, your review?
It was part of the response, but it's also part of there's an annual review.
Right. It's coming up okay. So are we going to be getting to the part where the second half of that motion, my motion, it was motion by me, seconded by Supervisor Collins, and to send back to the administrative committee to review of the possibility of changing the county administrator's review from the administrative committee to the full county board, and to also consider an outside entity to provide data collection. So to me, this is partly tied to that second half, the outside people. Have you guys, as the administrative committee, discussed the option of changing this from the administrative committee to the full county board? Because this is my only employee.
What we discussed at this point in time was to figure this part of the process out first. Let the board agree to what we're going to do. Then the administrator would take a look at it, come back with, okay, here's the option to leave it the way it is, or here's the option to do it via the county board. What we're trying to figure out is how you not have 21 people simultaneously review somebody, but have some type of structured process to it where everybody has equal input into it, and then Kim can be in a closed session to be reviewed in front of us.
So this is one part of
One
the
part
two
of it.
pieces of the questions.
Right. Susan.
I guess first I need to say that this isn't about Ken. This is about a process of evaluating an administrator. Since I've been on the county board, if I'm remembering correctly, for a while, we didn't have any method other than, I suppose, if something came up. And then we tried to put in a formal process. So what I would like to see, for the sake of discussion, is we can adjust the questions at any point. I have no problem with doing that through Kelly. What I would like to see is us have the reception of the information somehow out of this house, whether it's on a computerized thing or whether it is a consultant who just totals it all up and sends it to David. The perception is what it is. One of the administrators that I worked for in my teaching career required us to fill out evaluations of them too. And I want to tell you, it's a stressful thing. You don't know how it's going to be received. And I'm not criticizing Ken. It just is how it is. This was a very nice administrator I had. It still scared me. So the perception is, and it's hard to miss, that we had some people who didn't fill it out. And I would like us to get as much information as we can. I also would like to see the number of people on the outside that we send it to responding, just like a cross sampling of the kinds of people that an administrator for the county board would normally deal with. They may not have a whole lot to say, but it would still help us get a sense of how we're perceived in our. So those are my thoughts.
Laura?
Two questions. So for the software, this NeoGov, is there an option on that software then to censor out the names of the comments coming in versus, so if it's coming in, anybody has seen it, there's a name attached to it, or if they had questions, the review team or however that's set up can then look at maybe an IP number or something of that nature and dig deeper into the software to say, let's inquire a little bit more about that. We have to investigate, because I too, filling out the form, I'd rather not my name get there unless it's needed for follow-up. I like to keep it.
Yeah.
It has no choice in the matter for that software.
It's attached to an email and it's internet-based. So somehow it's got to.
Well, usually software is when you feed into it, some right. Surveys of this nature, that can be blanked or crossed out, censored out. And then if you wanted to research more, if there is a certain committee that's doing that, they can review that. I think that's healthier, the process, because even if you have an outside consultant, who knows the outside consultant? Who are they from the area? Who has connections to them? This information can't get out. You're trusting the system, right? But now we're paying more money versus I'd rather see it as software where that can be censored out so people know their input is going into a safe vault. And then that review team, whoever or however that's decided and made up, that if they need to inquire more, investigate more, they can do that, but it's a controlled then, and it's more legit and more respectful process. So the people that want to give feedback can be gentle. And then another question, I think I already forgot. I know that's a possibility. I'm just not sure what that software. So
just like you that.
There you go.
In the software.
So again, the idea is take the next month, take a look at this, provide input, have questions. And we'll revisit it next month again. But is it September to get sent out?
Usually in August.
So we have about a month approximately to try and finish working through it. But if we slip a month, we slip a month. As long as we get
I think it would be helpful if you could, just general consensus would be just some basic stuff. One, are there certain questions you'd like to add or remove? And then the other thing I've heard a lot is that people thought it was too long. So if you feel that that's the case, how would you consolidate that? And I have no vested interest either way in the length of it, but let Kelly know so that way she can actually get that part of it done. in advance. So if you have ideas of what you'd like to see in terms of the questions, please get those to Kelly.
Oh, Vinnie, sorry.
I'm just for new county board members, I think this was the case, but the department heads have a chance to give feedback on these as well, right? Because they would have okay. And theirs is the same as this, or they have one that looks different than this?
They're in the packet, so their questions are different than county boards.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
The model actually came from ICMA, which is an international cities and municipalities organizations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. We're going to move to the resolutions. Resolution 2020- Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Dan. Go ahead.
Well, I guess what I'd like to say is that I think we should strive to do it internally instead of going out and get a consultant. I can see having a consultant do it, cost it $5,000-$10,000, and we have a staff here now with high HR department then, and I think we should make that decision to keep it in-house. It should be revised, but keep it in-house. Otherwise, it's going to blow up and you're going to be spending $10,000-$15,000 every year to evaluate. We got a lot of smart people here. I think we can do it.
Okay. All right, thank you. Resolution 2020-51, statement of project intentions for Door County Chairland Airport. Right.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve resolution number 2020-51.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Just a brief explanation. What this is that every year the Department of Aeronautics has to know what the intention is because we need this document. They need this document so that they can provide funding. And this is provided to the Department of Aeronautics, and so therefore in the future they can do some budgeting for what the airport is going to request funds for.
Questions? Not on a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Resolution 2020-52, we are going to do that one when we do the presentation down below on special reports. Resolution 2020-53, approval of the United States Forest Service Cooperative Weed Management Area Grant for Invasive Species Education and Control. Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion to adopt resolution number 2020-53.
District 15 is a second.
This is a grant from the United States Forest Service in the amount of $40,000. I believe there's on line 23, there's a 20% or $10,000 in match monies, which will be provided by the Soil and Water Department, operating budget and donation dollars. And it is it's self-explanatory. It's for weed management. It's a weed management area grant for invasive species education and control.
Questions? We'll be going to the voter board for this one since it involves finances. That's passed with a vote of 20 yes, 0 nay, 1 absent. Resolution 2020-54, approval of the Arts Midwest NEA Big Read grant to the Door County Library. Megan. Page 45.
Yeah, I'm getting that. So we got this grant again, which is fantastic.
Do you have the microphone back there, Megan?
Oh, sorry.
There we go. Thank you. I don't
don't know if anybody really needs an explanation for it. If you're not familiar with what Big Read is, it's a great thing that we got this grant again, and it provides free books to folks in our community through our libraries. So I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 2020-54.
I'll second. Nessa.
Okay. If anybody has any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, but it seems like it's all pretty cut and dry now.
Any questions for me? If not, since it involves funding, we will go to the board. That's passed with a vote of 20 yes, 1 abstention. Thank you. Resolution 2020-55 to conduct countywide advisory referendum creation of nonpartisan procedure for the preparation of legislative, congressional redistricting maps and plans. Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to approve resolution 2020-55. We did hear from a couple of members of the public earlier. It's a topic that we've been talking about in legislative committee since January meeting, and we have gotten a lot of support from the public on this. I know there's that sort of age-old debate about what's the best path of resolution or referendum, and it seems these days we need all the tools in the toolbox to be functioning. So let me move this forward.
I would like to mention something. Bob and I talked previously, right after the committees got formed again, at some point in time, maybe next month, we'd like to have a conversation in general as to what types of actions, what types of things we're asking the legislative committee to look at and review. There's probably 100 different organizations that would love to come and have referendums. We've been approached by many in the past. And we as a county board have never sat down and had an open discussion as to which direction and the amount of the type of things that we'd like to do, either open it up to or restrict it to. So hopefully we'll have that conversation in the future. Just mention that passing. David.
Simple question. The line items 28 to 30 is the question that's been proposed. Is this mirroring the other counties' referendums that will be on their ballots? So in other words, are we using a cookie cutter sheet so it's pretty clear as the intent?
Yeah, it's mirrored pretty much across the board.
Grant, do you have anything to add?
No, it's based on a boilerplate that has been circulating. I can't say with certainty that it reflects word for word, but it's consistent with other like resolutions that have been enacted.
Susan?
The question that always comes up about whether we should have a referendum at the county level is it our role as county board supervisors to do this? Is this important to the county? I think a case can be made that it's very important to the county. The quality of governing that we are getting at the state level and the federal level is dependent on how the districts are drawn. And when they're gerrymandered, you get, as we heard in the testimony earlier, you get the kind of gridlock we see where they don't talk to each other. They don't feel like they have to listen to their constituents. So definitely it would improve governing. And since they make all the rules for what we have to do, that affects us every single day. The second piece of it is Wisconsin has totally failed at doing this. Even if this might work in some other states, it doesn't work here. We have, for decades, I mean, I want to say 60, 70 years, had multiple examples of where whatever party was in power, and it is both, this is nonpartisan, both parties do a bad job at this. They have done redistricting so that it ends up in the courts and it costs the state a whole lot of money that does not get sent to the counties and the municipalities to provide the services that we're supposed to be providing. So there isn't any question that we have a broken system. I looked through my file because I've been looking at redistricting forever. And one of the articles was a 2010 article. And at that point, there were 12 states that do it differently, that do it either through some sort of nonpartisan commission or a model similar to the Iowa model, which is really simple. In Iowa, this is why this one gets talked about. Because in Iowa, you put the census data in your computer. It's done in something called a Legislative Services Bureau, which is akin to our Legislative Reference Bureau in Madison. You put it in the computer, it spits out the districts using population as the criteria. So it's part of their job, and there's no extra expense. Then the only other expense is they have to send it to 4 hearings around the state so that the public can see it and comment on it. It does have to be approved by the legislature, and they have 4 cracks at that with some adjustments if they have suggestions for adjustments. Since this was put in the 80s, the early 80s, after years of broken systems like Wisconsin's, they have not been in the courts. It has not failed one time. Sometimes it might get to the 3rd try, or it might happen in the 1st try, but it has never failed. I just think we have blown it as a state. We just need to try something different that isn't going to cost this kind of money and gets us better government. And a referendum is a good way to let our people act on that.
Nissa?
So I grew up in a family where you vote, and that's what you do every election, every time there's, no matter what's on the ballot, even if it's something small that a lot of people don't care about, or if it's something big. That being said, I know a lot of people my age and younger that don't vote because they feel like the decision is already been decided based off of what district they live in, because of whatever party is in power, that they have no chance of having their voice heard. I've never really understood why nonpartisan districting was ever really up for debate. It just makes sense to have it be nonpartisan, so that way more people can have their voice heard. When it comes to whatever party is in power at the moment, and they make it a certain way so they can continue being in power, that just doesn't let anyone feel like they can have a voice. And what's the point of even bothering to vote when your say doesn't feel like it matters? Thanks.
David?
Just my broken record question that has nothing to do with my way of voting on this topic. Is there a cost to having this on the referendum? I know quite often if you put in different cycles, there's an expenditure to producing everything. Is there any additional cost to this? There shouldn't be with this election date.
There is some cost just because of the publication and stuff like that, but it's not insurmountable.
Right, not like some of the other ones where you gotta do a special election and all that stuff. No. Thank you.
Anything else? Sorry, Laura?
Yeah. I attended the legislative committee meeting as the ambassador, and I wanted to share some of the feedback and good, healthy discussion that committee had. So it seemed in the census of the committee that, and what was happening across the state is that, and speaking with local representatives for legislation, that they agreed something needs to be done about the district and planning. It was a question of how to approach it as a county through the resolution or referendum. And part of that conversation was, if we all agree and we feel that strong census in our community and our county that yes, something needs to be done, well, should we reserve the right for the referendum to say what we would like to be done and what the option would be to go forward? And I like that as a better option. I think we all can agree that yes, something needs to be done. And I think that's part of your voting right, to making sure your representatives are doing that for you. And when I had further discussion after that meeting for representatives, it sounds like they're working on it. It sounds that they're considering options, but even either political party doesn't have the best nonpartisan plan to go forward, that they have flaws in the ones of the states doing it. So I just thought I would share that because that was part of that healthy discussion on legislative committee. And that was an option considering of the discussion. There was a motion on the floor to move it to the referendum as the question had stated, and there was a good turn in what the committee would like to see come out as an option proposal. And I didn't hear anybody else from the committee to say that. So I thought that was healthy to say that. That's all.
Anybody else? Okay, on a voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion is carried. All right, we'll move down to special reports. 2020 census.
The 2020 census was this request to be put in from WCA. This is an FYI, just in terms of the 2020 census and status. So that's in your packet for information. It shows that now that Brevard County has a lower response rate. And we're not exactly sure why. We've done certain things to make both through our social media and also through the, I guess, educational materials. But again, it's just requested by WCA that's on there. So it's just FYI for the board itself.
Next will be the presentation overview of the library, Miller Art Museum, excuse me, Historical Museum and Archives, 442 Michigan Street and 56 North 4th Avenue.
Sure. So I'm not sure how this is going to work on the screen. I'm not sure, Joe, if it's showing up on showing the camera, but it's not showing. There it is. So I don't know if it's out of time or how that works. I don't know. It's just doing the count. I'm not sure how to. Oh, I can control it. All right. Sorry, I'm excited. So, okay, so I'm the spokesperson, so both Tina and Wayne are available for questions, but we've been working on this project for a while. And it did go to Facilities and Parks, and I guess what we're looking for today is not a decision. So take a breath. You can relax at that standpoint. But we are actually looking for two things. One, we're looking for some guidance for Facilities and Parks. And then two, the other part would be is what else would you need in terms of information, facts, data that help you make a decision, so that does have a larger impact on us. So what's going to seem weird is we're going to eventually narrow down into what's the formal Yonkers building. But what I'd like to do is just kind of talk about it holistically, and I'm going to walk you through this presentation, if you don't mind. So again, just going through the pages, obviously we're going to go over the facilities and also what we're calling, I just termed it as a campus right now, just because I'm trying to get my mind around all of our facilities in the downtown. But before we dive in, so we have what are some of our planned facilities or major renovations. So these are the things that we know either from the CIP or things that have been stated. Again, these are just plans. They're not formal approvals for projects, but these are some of the things that are out there. So we have the Washington Island, the government facility for that. There's the Section 980 housing, which is a potential project that's on the radar. Again, if you're not familiar with 980, that's housing for individuals that are released, that are considered sexual offenders. And when they're released, they're required to be housed in the county they originated from. So we have, I think, 3 to 6 individuals that are, I guess, in the system, but we know at least 2 that are, I guess, coming forward for potential. But that's one of the things that should be on our radar, that we have to have housing available for them. The next one is the airport maintenance building. That's a potential project coming forward. The good news about that is we're hoping to get mostly federal funded for that project, 90-10, should it go forward in 2023. Obviously, there's the archives project. There's always been discussion of a Jackson Port / Egg Harbor ambulance station. It's been included in the CIP. It keeps on getting moved back, but it's always been included. One that's been discussed by the library, which we'll get into, is looking at a library renovation or update. And one that's been under back and forth with our CIP is just the John Miles stage. So one of the things I put down is how do we want to prioritize or fund these potential projects. And this is kind of one of the things we need to discuss is the difference between operational versus our capital budgets. So again, when we do capital budgeting, it doesn't mean we want to go on a spending spree. And obviously we have our fiscal limitations coming up. But again, there are certain things that we do or should keep on doing in terms of our operations just to kind of keep us moving forward and progressing. So when we look at our capital budget, one of the things you could say is, well, we shouldn't do anything because we're in a fiscal crisis. Yes and no would be the answer. Yes, we want to be conservative in what we do, but also, yes, we want to continue to move forward with what we consider priorities and also working on our budget and how we do our projections. So when you look at our budget, there's our operational side, that's part of our budget. That's our day-to-day stuff. And then there's our capital. And our capital can be either part of the operational, in other words, it's built in and we have to maintain that within the levy limit. Or, for example, our community center, that's something that we bonded for. And we're paying for that along with the Justice Center right now. But that's actually sitting outside of the levy limit. So as long as you understand that balance and how you move forward, you can kind of balance how you do your spending to still get to your goals and objectives of how you spend money within the government sector itself. So again, the main purpose here is what I'm trying to get across is that obviously we want to be fiscally strong and we also want to be smart in where we spend our money. But the mindset should not be that we shouldn't do anything because of COVID-19 or because of the levy limit. We need to look at our operations and our capital and build that together as a program and say, this is what we can do operationally. This is what we need to do on our capital side with our expenses outside the levy limit to still accomplish our goals and make things still continue to move forward. So that's just a brief one, and we can get into that more if we have questions or comments on that. So let's just kind of dive into the campus, and this is where Facilities and Parks is kind of coming together. And it's going to seem a little bit disjointed, what I'm going to cover a little bit, but it's going to come together, and you'll see why as I go through it. So the first one, obviously, just going from the top down in your presentation, obviously, I'm just pointing out the former Yonker building location. Then the next two with the arrow, it shows you the historic museum. And then I guess what I consider to the northeast would be the two properties, which were 434 and 442 Michigan. And then obviously I already mentioned the historic museum, and then you see the government center, obviously, and then obviously our library. So those are, I guess, what I'm considering as part of our discussion right now for our campus aspect. So what you'll see in the presentation, there's been tons of ideas, but I think overall there's not been that overall vision of what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that's where we're trying to get Facilities and Parks is trying to have that discussion with the county board, is to say, what are we going to have as a vision and help us kind of head down that path. So there's been a lot of ideas. So for example, you'll see some of the diagrams. There's some ideas about expanding the library to 3rd Avenue, or expanding the library north into the south, or even potentially having a new library. There's also been discussions about expanding the museum, moving the Miller Art Museum, creating a museum campus, or creating more parking. Those are just some of the things that have been out there. There's probably some other ones that I have missed, but again, there's just been a lot of different ideas of what could or potentially be done, and I guess we're trying to have that discussion of where we think we want to go. Some of the facts of what we know today. So obviously the library, when we get into the presentation, the library was actually built in 1975. There hasn't been any major renovations done to the facility. There's been some minor updates, but again, they're looking to potentially update the facility sometime in the future. The Miller Art Museum would like to stay connected to the library. That's their desire. It's not a requirement, but that's one of their things that they met with their board, and they said we'd like to maintain the connection with the library. And you'll see from the stuff I included in the packet that that connection dates back to when the library was actually built in 1975. We do need to find a physical home for the archives. Again, the archives, when I get into it, it has a natural fit with the library, and we went through analysis to get there, and I'll cover that a little bit later in the presentation. Another point is when we purchased the Yonker building, I guess the one thing I'll throw out as a reminder is actually two aspects. One is obviously the building itself, but also the location and also the parking. So I just want to give context of the thoughts of why we originally purchased that building. There's, I guess in my mind, 3 equal parts to that. And I guess why we're partially here today is just based on the cost projections, which we'll get into to the foremost Yonker building. I guess we want to make sure that we have the right vision moving forward as the county. And I think we're trying to bring all these in together as part of the dialogue to have that discussion here today. So actually what I'm going to do is just take just a few minutes now and just go back in history just to get us all on the same page. Because it varies on the county board of who knows what's been done and what's kind of going on. And this was brought up at Facilities and Park that we need to get all on the level playing field of what's happening out there. So the first one is this is just based on the library. Again, the library is built in 1974 and dedicated in 1975. The building is actually owned under joint ownership by the city of Sturgeon Bay and our county. We both own that facility. In your packet, there's an intergovernmental agreement. The city and the county split the maintenance costs related to the building, both in terms of staff, but also anything we put in terms of investments. So for example, last year we put on a new roof. That roof was split 50-50 between the county and the city as far as the funding for that. The county then funds and runs the library and its associated branches. The Miller Art Museum, again, as I mentioned before, became part of the building when the family donated $50,000 and a portion of a permanent art collection that went towards the construction of the building and the art wing that's considered or where it's housed right now. It's important to point out that the library is governed by the library board, which duties are defined in the state statutes. So it's one of those things where it's a little bit different in terms of our other departments, in that the library board probably has more authority over the operations of the budget. Again, this is one of the things that Grant kind of pointed out. The county board probably has a little bit more control on the purse strings, in other words, the financing of the library, and obviously we maintain the building and stuff like that. But the library board is actually the entity that does the day-to-day operations of the library itself. And that's why I said the library board is responsible for the operations, the county board is responsible for the funding, and then the city and county, again, are responsible for the actual building. The library has both a Friends of the Library and a Library Foundation. If you see the slides, you can see that both groups have a little bit difference in terms of what they're doing in terms of their operations, or not their operations, but what they do for the library itself. The Friends, you can see, do supports for the library goals, activities, and services, provide volunteers, and they actually do some acquisition of things for the libraries itself. The Library Foundation, you can see, was formed for the benefit of the entire system. They focus on library services, facilities, and needs, and also try to get, I guess, what I consider, I'm not saying necessarily larger, but they go for more capital programming and things related to that. Again, the Miller Art Museum is really not part of the county operations. It's governed by its own board of directors. But the county does provide funding towards the Miller Art Museum. And it's really funding in two ways. One is we contribute, as part of the library budget, we contribute almost $12,000 towards the operations of the Miller Art Museum, as far as this curation. And the other part is indirect. It's probably about $40,000 to $50,000 of indirect support for the library, just in the space that they occupy. Obviously, building space, maintenance, utilities, etc. So it's a pretty sizable contribution in general that we're doing for that. Again, now I just want to cover just really quickly some of the plans that have been out there. It's been brought up, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to make sure the county board is all on the same page in terms of what's been discussed. But really, in 2017, the Library Foundation, they funded a project to explore options. And really, they looked at expanding or constructing a new library. Again, these plans were put together for exploratory and determining the long-term vision. The plans were discussed at the library board, but they were put on hold by the board until they had a better understanding of the needs of the library. Okay. There have been some discussions on an overall library assessment. I know Tina has started some of those discussions, but it has not been completed to date. But just really quickly, so some of the concepts that were looked at, again, there was one concept where they added on to what's considered to the two wings of the library. The cost estimate was between $13 to $20 million for that. Concept 2 actually had it extending down to 3rd Street. And again, this had a similar cost estimate, but it was a concept for expanding the library. And then the third concept obviously was looking at what they considered a new library down by the undeveloped portion of the city property. At that time, the cost estimate was $18 to $28 million. So again, those were concepts that were put together by the Library Foundation, brought to the library board, but didn't really go any further than that at that point in time. So let's jump now a little bit, just in terms of our discussions to the museum. Had to rely on Dan for some history on this one, so thank you, Dan. The museum was built in 1939, and then the museum and the firehouse addition was completed in 1984. The Pioneer Fire Company, Surgeon Bay, actually owns the fire equipment that's housed in that building. The archives were part of the museum, but never really had the proper funding as far as some history. And actually, I'm going to skip the bullet, but in 2018 and 19, we actually did a study on how to best organize the museum and archives. And that's where we kind of moved. So right now, it used to be the History Museum and the archives. We actually took the archives and made it part of the library. And it has a direct report to Tina and the library board. The museum itself is also, from an org chart standpoint, underneath the library. But the museum actually has a museum committee yet, simply because the library board does not have the authority to oversee the museum. So again, Tina's overseeing both of those operations, but one's a natural fit to the library and to the library board itself. The museum still operates under Tina, but it actually has authority underneath the museum committee. Likewise, in 2011, a study was done to look at expanding the museum, and it was actually for twofold. One is for the storage of the museum and also the archives. So again, as part of that expansion, that's when we looked at the purchasing of 434 and 442 Michigan. The home on 434 was taken down at the time of the purchase, and the home on 442 is still standing. It has been used for storing part of our archives collection.
Yeah, question. Step back, these concepts, 1, 2, and 3, you said those were presented to the library board. And so was that part of their process at looking at these concepts? I'm trying to look at what has already been done and what our relationship as the county or the city has been involved in that so far, with what these concepts that were brought forward.
The county and city were, I guess, aware of the work that was being done, but we never got to the point of actually drawing it in because the library board never supported moving forward with them. Okay. So if they would have had any interest in pursuing some of those options, I guess the natural step would be to pull in facilities and parks and the city council likewise to start having those discussions on those concepts. But we never got that far.
Vinny?
Just a quick clarifying question. So presently, where are there archives in that house you just mentioned, and then in the library, and then also in the museum?
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So there's, yeah. I believe we're trying to move some of the stuff. I know Wayne's online. I'll put them on, but we had stuff into the house up to last month. I know we're trying to actually move it out, but there's stuff in the library. There's stuff in this building and at the house, and also in the museum.
And the second part of that question is with the Library Foundation looking for expansion or renovation was on here. And you said they haven't completed, that process, but was it to house archives or did they want expansion for what purpose, I guess, or was that decided?
Well, I think it was actually looking at, Tina's online for that too. So I can give you the brief answer and I'll bring them on, but the brief answer would be at that time, the archives probably were not part of that discussion in 2017. But their expansion was looking at the way current facilities operate. So I know there's some discussion, for example, there was some concept of having a coffee house and a larger, I guess, sitting areas or public spaces for people to interact and do internet and that type of thing. And also expanding some of the collections and so forth, for reading materials and so forth.
Okay, thank you. That's the one part I was having a hard time understanding is the actual square footage needed for archives and if they were separate archives from what the library has, what the museum has. Or if we're looking to house all the archives in one place, which is one of the options you'll maybe get to.
Correct. Thank you. So we have Susan, but I want to hold down the questions. We want to get through the presentation. Go ahead, Susan.
Well, this is quick. Obviously, some professional work had to be done to come up with those 3 concepts. I'm wondering who paid for it.
The foundation,
the library foundation.
Okay, so so the concept, I just want to give you context for why we bought those 2 properties next to the museum. So then if you go to part of the presentation, I actually have the original plan that was done in 2011. If you look at the PowerPoint, you actually see the existing building And then you'll see where the red lines are rendered. You can actually see that was the area that was going to be the addition onto the museum. And there was two parts of it. One was obviously what we consider the archives. There was one small addition in terms of where they have museum display space. But actually underneath that whole thing was also the basement. That was addition to the basement that provided the space for the museum collections. At that time, it was about $2.1 million, and that's based off 2011. Just a ballpark estimate would be about $4.2 million today. So that brings us now up to the Yonkers building, which we purchased in 2019. We hired an architect to conduct the planning process and develop some options. Through that process, again, we gathered input from the community and also from various stakeholder groups. The consultant held, or the architect held all those sessions. And then in essence, based off some work and feedback from facilities and parks, they put together, I guess, some plans. And we'll kind of walk through those, but one is for using the entire structure. One is for removing the front portion of the structure and using the back portion. Removing the entire structure with the new construction of the archives and the youth connection program, and then removing the entire structure and the new construction of the archives only. And I'm just going to walk through those in concept. So in your packet, you'll see the presentation. The one is actually using the entire building. In essence, what you'll see on the, I guess consider the bottom of the page or the south of the page, you'd see the archives were placed in the one portion of the building. Above that then would be, I guess, what we consider the shared kitchen and restrooms. And then the youth connection would be in the top right-hand corner, approximately 3,000 square feet. The area, what we're considering the front of the building, was actually designed as open space that would be leased. There's different concepts that are brought up from the community, whether that would be a museum or lease space that would be managed by DC, EDC. There's just a lot of ideas, but we never entered into formal discussions with anyone on any of those. The cost estimate for this project, depending on whether or not you include the solar, is $5.5 to $6.1 million. The cost per square foot is about $272. As a comparison, the community center itself was about $260 per square foot. So that just gives you a reference point in terms of what we invested into the community center versus the cost that might be potentially invested into this building.
You might explain what the youth connection, why that's in there.
Sure. So
you're not going to know.
Sorry, the Youth Connection Program is a program underneath Human Services that we get grant funding for. It's a program that provides, services for teenagers that are at risk, that are potentially, or that are not in school. And we're trying to keep them, productive in completing both their education, but also learning life skills to remain, valuable parts of the community versus entering into, other programs we're trying to keep them out of. Right now, we are currently leasing space for that program out of what's called the JC building. And there was discussion when this all came up is, why would we have a building that's partially vacant and still paying lease? So the concept is to make the drawings to include the youth connection program into the building. Then the discussion kind of focused in, as you can kind of see out of that square footage, there's still a large portion that the county is not using at this point in time. So facilities and parks had mentioned that they think that government is not good at being a leaseor. We're not in a position to be a landlord. And even though we can turn over that function to EDC or some other entity, it's still not our core value or core function. And they're also concerned with the cost per square foot or the cost of the project in general. So then what we did is we asked the consultant to go to the next page of your packet to look at those next three options. And what you'll see is the price comes down, but the price per square foot goes up. But anyway, so there was really three options, and you'll kind of see them. They weren't as detailed in terms of the drawings or the layout, but they're concepts of what the consultant considered. So starting on the left, working right, you'll see the first one is to demolish the front portion of the building. You then house that for the archives and youth connection. You end up with about 11,850 square feet. The cost of that is $3.5 million with an average cost of about $296 per square foot. The next option was obviously tearing down the entire structure and then rebuilding a similar footprint, a little bit smaller, about 10,000 square feet, which the average cost is about $466 per square foot. And then the last option that they looked at was tearing down the entire structure and then this building only, I guess in archives, which would be about 5,000 square feet. And again, that cost per square foot is $586 per square foot. So really that kind of brings us to where we're at today. Again, these are all, you can kind of see there's a lot of things that are, I guess, in motion. And why we wanted to talk about the library and the museum and also the Yonkers building, because there's been a lot of discussions about, like one of the concepts was, well, should we move the Miller Art Museum into the front portion of the Yonkers building and have that be the museum campus? And then that way the library would have that space to expand into the library. You would have to spend any money on the expansion for the library. Well, there's been some discussions, but the Miller Art Museum really doesn't want to be separated from the library. So it's kind of that push and pull, and that's where all those discussions and why all these buildings are starting to tie into one another and why we want to get some guidance from the county board. So really, if you look at the last page, this is kind of where we're at. We can do anything. So obviously there's the option that we keep the building, right? We keep Yonkers and we proceed with one of those options developed by the architect. But the only one that staff would not recommend is possibly the full renovation. It's because of the overall cost and the projected use. It's kind of hard for us at the staff level, even though, you know, that front portion of the building, you can say, well, we'll eventually grow into it, but that's a very expensive proposition to do that. And now we're kind of in that business of managing property. So if anything, facilities and parks have probably felt the strongest that way as well, in terms of that's not probably the best option. But anyways, there's still options that we could proceed with that. Obviously, there is the option of, okay, well, maybe this wasn't the best fit. We could sell it. And we could look at maybe revisiting the addition back onto the museum. You could do the museum, have the parking lot, and you could actually sell that and say, hey, we're going to provide an easement on the parking in the back. That way you have the best of both worlds, and now we get that building back into play as far as the downtown. That also could be an option. I guess what we're looking for is what guidance or what information would you like to see or for us to gather to help you, I guess, distill or be able to make a decision. The one thing I guess I will end with is obviously the one thing we have not taken up is the house on 442 Michigan Street. And that's been, I guess, it's gone through two different, I guess, bids to have it removed. And again, we actually brought it up last year to have it be taken down. And then we held off because there was some consideration that Human Services might be able to use it for a home for some of their services. We went through the analysis and really to bring it up to any type of use that the county can do, it becomes very cost prohibitive in terms of the amount of updates we have to make to the home. So then what we did is we brought that to Facilities and Parks and they said, okay, well, even before that, we looked at trying to have the house moved. And it's really not feasible to move the house. We've had it looked at by 3 different individuals, but they really can't move it because of the bricks. And once you start to move it, it's just going to collapse. So we did look at actually moving it as well. So then we went out for bid again, and that's in the packet, those costs related to it. And I guess this is kind of where we're at right now in regards to, I guess right now we're recommending that either way that the home be removed. And again, it's on your agenda to be done this year. Or if you're not comfortable of financing it as not being part of the budget, we could actually, I guess there's no reason why we can't keep it for the rest of the 6 months and then bid it again and actually make it part of the budget process. But I guess right now we're recommending that either way that house would, I guess, come down.
Lauren.
Yeah, thanks. I would like to see a sheet together of what the library museum, what the county contributes per year. So the total of wages, services, utilities, etc. I was not aware that, you know, total costs are up to over $60,000 to that Mueller Art Museum in 1 year. That is a considerable amount of contribution. I was not aware of that. So thank you for that information. I actually, living in Door County, I was not aware that Miller Art Museum existed in the public library for a while. And I would go to the public library and I thought, what a beautiful museum. It feels like it's hidden in that library a little. But it is a beautiful museum. So that would be nice to see the actual, what the county is contributing. I would also like to see, if, and hopefully the other colleagues and supervisors agree, that if any other concepts, ideas, projects, for anything mentioned in this project going forward, either the library, the museum, that there's a city representation and a county representation at those meetings. It seems like there's been a lot of work going on over the last decade, and we were not a part of it, and partly maybe because we didn't know how much we were actually contributing to that as resources. So I would definitely like to see the amount of resources that we're contributing to both of these, and even Tina's salary. Partly also too, because when you talked at the beginning about capital improvement plans, right? Well, this does impact our operations. So if there's an expansion of any of the library or the museum or changes to that, that directly impacts us. If we have contracts with them to do maintenance services, or we own half of the building, we have to be part of those conversations and discussions. And I think it's needed. Another question. I thought I recall something where it said cost to date on the Yonkers building. And I wanted to just, if we could get that comparison with on page 9 of your handout for your presentation. It says the 3 options from left to right: reduction, replacement, replacement. And replacement of actually demolishing the existing structure. And then it puts the square footage cost of that. Seems high, but I would like to see if we could see how that relates to what we're paying now on utilities, and actually break that out in a different way instead of seeing that big sticker tag on that. If I'm seeing that correctly, I think that would be healthy to try and compare it that way on when utilities go down, because the size of the structure is only 5,000 feet versus the close to 12,000 feet. So yeah, I mean, that helps relate the numbers.
On page 13 of your packet, there's the heat and utilities, and it's expensive building. So right now we're almost close to $30,000, a little over $30,000, $32,000 in utilities for both heat, gas, and utilities. I know, Wayne, you're in the peninsula room. You want to chime in on that?
What page did you say?
Page 13 of the packet. We have the expenses on the Yonkers building to date, but we actually have what we have budgeted for expenses for utilities.
Thank you.
So that utility costs and those line items are actually based on the historic costs that Yonkers had paid to either WPS or Sturgeon Bay Utilities. In order to get an accurate number on what it's going to be for 5,000 square feet, that's really for engineers to figure out in the next phase or next process of what we decide to build. So it's really unknown what it's going to be without knowing what systems are going to go into that facility.
It's just healthy to give that consideration for all the supervisors, that if your square footage goes down, yes, the cost square footage to do that plan might be higher, but your operation or maintenance costs will go down considerably as a common sense approach.
Yeah, I just wanted clarification. To me, a library is a source for resources, books, magazine, videos, audio, internet access, and most recently added. Museum is a location of historical information and that stuff. Archives to me has always been a variation of a museum kind of activity. Explain to me how it's a natural connection to the library. I don't see that. I don't understand.
Tina, did you want to cover that one or should I? Tina, are you still there?
Oh, yes, I'm still here. I was just checking to see if I was unmuted. It's a natural extension to have an archives or historical information also be part of a public library. Many public libraries around the state do have a history room in their buildings, and they take care of history of their local area. So that would be considered an archival sort of situation that lives within a public library. So we do see that as a natural extension. And the Department of Public Instruction also, I inquired of them if that is the case, and they do see that happening too and approve of that happening in public libraries. We also have at the public library here, we have a Miller history room, And that basically is a miniature archives of historical information.
I guess the reason I was asking is because while I have seen that as well, historically, there's no local museum involved, and we have a local museum. And I would imagine, I believe the majority of those items that were sent to the archives have been donated, were actually donated to the museum side of the world, not the library side of the world. And if some people that may have donated may have felt that there's a concern that, hey, I donated to the museum, I didn't donate to the library. And I'm just, to me, I just wanted to make sure I understood why we're putting that underneath that, but then we're still keeping the library separate because that's just what you just described as well. I mean, the museum separate.
We're keeping the museum separate because there's a separate state statute that outlines how public museums operate and who can operate them and administer them. And a public library is not one of those entities that can do that with a museum.
Thank you.
Katie?
Thank you. I had a similar, I guess, a point of clarification. When I'm seeing all the different plans laid out in front of us, and then I'm seeing what seem like duplications of if the library expands, and are they going to also have an expansion of the archives section, which isn't shown on this, that we know from the foundation. But then the museum addition has a section for archives, but then also the Yonkers building would have an archival area. So are we pulling these together and saying, if we do the Yonkers option, then the need for an expansion of the museum goes away? The need for the expansion of the library also goes away? Or that's the one that's unclear? I guess it just seems like a lot of, in pulling this together, I see why you need guidance because there's a lot of repetitive overlaps.
Right, so we would not duplicate the archive, so we try to get it into one consolidated location, whether it be the library, museum, or at the former Yonkers building would be the consolidated. Obviously, one for the collection standpoint, but also for the cost related to it.
So the follow-up to that is, does the expansion on the museum need go away if we go with the archive renovation at Yonkers? Or because they have a theater and they have other things in their renovation area? I'm just trying to have it pretty much from the museum group as far as what they need and what their expansion is needed for.
Part of the design of the archives did have space for the museum to store some of their collection in there as well in the climate control location. So the idea would be is that if we would use the former building, we'd meet the needs of the museum as well, as far as their storage and collection.
So then the expansion of the museum would be off the plan for now. Okay,
correct.
Thank you.
Alexis?
Thank you. I have 2 questions and I'll go in order. During your presentation, you said that Miller wants to remain physically connected to the library. Why? The administrative costs or do we know?
I think it's more of a thing of where they try to integrate programming and they try to have people that patronize the library also, I guess, patronize or use the museum aspect. And it's been a strong relationship since it's come together, and they like to maintain that. That's their goal.
All right, thank you. Are the 2011 and 2018-19 studies that were done available? I tried to look on our SD cards and stuff.
The 2011 study is actually in your packet.
That's what this is.
That was partially included in your packet. That's I think it's the Groffman study. That's the 2011 one on the museum.
Thank you.
So press on page 1 of your packet.
Okay, that's the 2011, and this is where the plan and your slides came from.
Correct.
Okay.
So I try to do the presentation as consolidated, but I have all the, I guess, the baseline research included in your packet for reference.
Yeah, I didn't. Oh, that's right. Okay, all right. There was a lot. So, okay.
Yep.
And then the 2018-19 study, where is that? Is that something that the county did, or that the library foundation?
The study that we did, this in terms of the reorganization of.
Right.
That was I guess I should have clarified that. I guess it wasn't a formal study where we put everything together, but that went through all the committees in terms of our recommendations and iterations of how we reorganize.
So I need to go back through all the committee minutes.
Well, I can provide like a staff memo where we did some of the summaries of our recommendations, so I can get those to you.
That'd be great. And And then the last one, just to clarify, what year were the properties on Michigan Street purchased? It says that they were purchased in response to the study, but I don't know what year they were actually.
I'll have to rely on Dan, maybe he knows the date better than I do.
It was right around, 2 separate times, I think. We bought what the Ladenbach building, house was, that's tore down. And then about a year or two later, the one next to it came up for sale and we bought that one. I don't know what the prices were, but we were right around the assessed value.
Okay, thank you.
This was there.
Aaron?
I can't give you the actual dates, but Dan's right. There were 2 separate deals. After Gladys died, then we dealt with the 3 kids there and bought the Lautenbach house that's torn down, and then maybe 2 years later, then we bought the brick building.
Aaron?
Thank you. So when I am kind of taking in all this information from you, I really appreciate it and putting this together. And what I see as a vital thing is really determining our vision. So one of my first questions is, have we ever done like a comprehensive community assessment? And I'm sure in some capacity we have, but in conjunction with the city too. In my experience, just watching through jobs and different things in my life, it's like we make this huge plan to build something, and then it seems like it's outgrown in 5 years or 10 years or something. So what I think is really important in this discussion is like speaking with city council and thinking as big as we can for Door County. What are our values? What do we want to be leading in terms of our community with? And then, you know, bringing everything that we have together and really maximizing what we have. And then all the details will fall into place, you know, step by step. So thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, I got a couple questions and I got some answers too. For Dave, archives, a lot of the archives that are in the archives now were originally in the library basement, and they wanted to get it out of there. And that's where we started forming the archives and bringing them together. Now I guess they're back in the basement of the library again. And I'd like to thank Ken for putting this together. This is very, very good. I've been fortunate enough that I was actually in the city plan commission when they located a library there. One of my things is I got voted down on that one. I wanted to put it on Market Square, but it ended up over here. That used to be the Future Farmers of America building for the high school, if I remember correctly where it is now. Anyway, there's one thing I'd like to happen today is that we approve tearing that building down on 4th Avenue. It was in the budget originally. The property committee at the time says Joe Kresbeck could look into it and had determined that it's not working for him. And then they forgot, or whoever forgot, to put it back in the budget again. So we're really not taking it from the budget. And time, the bid was very close, but the bid that was accepted, something I liked about it is that they had the place to put all the asbestos and all that kind of thing. It was in the bid. And if you delay this another year until you get it in the budget, that bid could go up quite a bit because of how they're going to get rid of all the asbestos and the stuff that has to go in the landfill. And the only recommendation I would have today is to take our time and look this over very thoroughly on how we put this all together. It took us 10 years to put the ADRC building out of the county shop, and that turned out fantastic. And of course, I have this, he alluded to it, Ken did. When we started talking about the Yonkers building, I thought, boy, that would make a beautiful cultural center. Move the Miller Art Center into there with their storage, the archives in there with the storage. And then you'd have the part of the library for expansion of the library without putting on a $10 million project on the library. But quite frankly, this thing got stonewalled. Nobody seems to jump on my bandwagon on that one because the Miller Art Center wants to stay in the library. Well, it would be part of the library, just in 2 separate buildings, but that's where it stands right now. That was one of my ideas anyway, but to take our time.
Thank you, Dan. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. I have a question relating to the concept photographs of the library, potential library expansion, page 97, 98, 99, and then on page 100. So when it, well, I guess maybe I should ask a question about the concept images. I guess concept 2, it's got Butch's Bar and then that other house. Those are just in there as reference, or done to kind of give scale or something. Because I mean, those aren't part of the idea. Would it? They're part of the project, are they?
Reference.
Just reference. That's what I figured. And then again, it might be the scale of the photograph, or photographs. But in concepts 1, 2, and 3, are those all like the same square footage, or is it just utilizing the space that's there? And I'm just curious if just from comparing, if those are all basically about the same square foot, or if it's just sort of utilizing what.
If you go to page 100, it actually shows you the square footages, and you can see they're approximately the same square footage. So there's the new, and then there's the renovation standpoint. But
and then that is my other question. So because I assume page 100 referenced the photographs, but the list on page 100 lists option 1, option 1A, and option 1B, which is confusing because hand penciled on penned on the pictures is concept 1, 2, 3. So can we make a more direct comparison? What's
actually that's my mistake, because Tina can clarify. But actually, the option 1, option 1A, and option 1B are all related to concept 1. So actually, I might have misspoke. So Tina, were the square footages for each concept the same in general?
I don't believe so. I think they were. Are you talking about options 1 and A and B, or concepts 1, 2, 3?
Concepts 1, 2, 3.
I think it was just putting them into a space. I don't think that they were exactly the same square footage. That wasn't the thought.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. But that's why I asked the question. Yeah, thank you.
Susan?
At one point in recent years, we had someone hired who did a survey of all of the archives that are around. We have lots of small historical societies in the county, and they all have stuff. Aunt Mabel's got something in her attic, and Uncle George has got it under his bed or whatever. But they wanted to see what was out there, in the thought that some of it, certainly not all of it, might come at some point. But with the idea that these are all resources, and if they are cataloged by the library and go into that system, they are available to the public in some fashion. So that was a part of that whole discussion, and it's kind of important because preserving some of these probably means getting it out of that basement or that attic. Then the other thing, and this is kind of unrelated except it's related, for the new people, you presented the history of our Sturgeon Bay Library, but you might want to say a word or two about the fact that we have 8 branches and we have kind of similar arrangements with them just in general, so that they get the whole library system, because it is bigger than just that building.
Tina, you want to do that? I know you have a little canned one. That's probably better than my response.
Sure. The relationship between the libraries is very similar, as you mentioned, in that the county pays for the staffing and materials for each one of the 8 branches that are in Door County. But the entity that is funding the building where each branch is located is paid for by that entity. So a town or a village is paying for the building and the maintenance of that building, just like the maintenance of the building here in Sturgeon Bay is being paid for by the city and the county. So there is that similar relationship where the county is paying for a portion of what happens at the library, but the building is being provided by the local municipality. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Sturgeon Bay Library, this is a partnership with the city of Sturgeon Bay. I'm sorry if I missed, but where's the city with what all the, this involves a lot of money. Did I miss it, or where's the city with this?
Again, the city it hasn't really been brought to the city council. I know they were aware of some of the stuff being done by the foundation, but again, the concepts for the library never went to either Facilities and Parks, County Board, or City Council. So, I mean, it hasn't gone to that portion yet at all.
Don't we think we're getting pretty close to getting the city involved with this too?
Well, again, I think that's why we're here having this discussion, because depending on what type of guidance you have, if we're just gonna look at Yonkers or if we're just gonna look at the museum, then no, the city's not involved. But if we're gonna say, well, hey, we really want to see if we want to do an expansion on the library, then yes, then we got to pull in the city and have that discussion with them and have them involved as part of the process.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, thank you. Follow up partly with a comment about the comprehensive planning. It would be nice to see as a request for the library goals are that they're setting for themselves as an organization, also in the museum. How are they seeing themselves in 5 and 10 years? What's their programming looking like? What's their progression? Are they just stalemate, or they have plans? It would be nice to see that as we're part of that representation on those boards. And then and even the county goals and the initiatives that we've had, that we pulled over the last years, and just having that laid out before us. If there is something that we can pull together, looking at what the city's comprehensive plans have been, is there anything in there that fits with what we're looking at and viewing? Also the county comprehensive plan. When I mentioned the library, though, the 5 and 10 years, I think it would be fair to mention what is each branch also looking at. We have a relationship with Egg Harbor. There's a great collaboration there. They're the beautiful, nice, clean new facility for themselves in that collaboration. So I think that has to almost be part of that fair balance conversation. Is since we're a county having several different branches, we have to look at where they're all at, those branches, and we're not picking one more than the other of the needs, I think, for a fair taxpayer dollar.
Just
want to add on to one thing. I'm not sure if all the supervisors realize this. Megan and I do, being on library board. The library does not have to follow everything that the county does. While it's kind of a county committee, it is 2 county board members, 2 Sturgeon Bay City Council members, and then different people representing parts of the county, somebody representing the school system libraries and stuff like that. It follows not only county, but state and federal statutes. So, for instance, when the library was approached to take over the museum and take over the archives, it was up to the library to do it if they wanted to. If we had said, no, we don't want Tina to do that, it would be too much work, it's not worth it, the library had every right to say no, and the county wouldn't have had much of a recourse on it to try to get the library to do it. The reason why the library board accepted it was on the condition that Tina would be paid for, more to take over more responsibility. And at any time if the library board decides that it's too much work for Tina, we have the right to drop it, and then it's on the county again. When it comes to programming for library, all of that is available online. You can follow library on Facebook. There's emails. There's also, you can pick up handouts for any events you want to see. Plus, I know Ken will put a lot of the events at the library at the end of his weekly emails. I don't know if Tina wants to clarify anything I just said, but there's certain things that the library can do that regular county committees don't have the option for, because the federal statutes will trump whatever the county statutes are. Thanks.
Thanks, Nessa. Dave?
Anybody that's been in the Door County Museum of any time will recognize that it's a rather full building. There's been various discussions through the years that, while I've been on the committee, of building in addition to that, and one that we saw in the packet here for their space. Why are we not looking at adding that as one of the remodeling projects at some point in time? You had said earlier that there's not even a consideration at this time.
Maybe I can probably clarify. I guess the idea is if we could go back and look at doing the expansion onto the museum, or like I said, if we would pursue the Yonkers, we'd ensure I guess, all the concepts that we had the consultant look at incorporated providing space for the museum for their, in talking with Maggie and the staff there, they were not looking to expand the museum as far as display space. They're looking for, I guess, space to house their collections. So the stuff that's more sensitive as far as temperature control, that type of thing. So could the vision maybe change and you want to expand the museum as far as display space? Yes, that's an option, but that was not something that was, I guess, stated as an interest from
a few years back, 6 years back before you got here, they definitely were looking for more display space, but maybe that was tied to the fact that so much of their space was occupied by archives, and now that would resolve part of that.
The plan show that.
Okay. And then the other thing is, if we make any decisions to change what the library is here and start about the physical building, is there any current rumblings we've heard about the city looking to change the 50-50 ratio that we have right now?
Not at this point in time, but again, if we had had something on that's a completely county function, like I say, let's say we just did an archives edition, you could probably do a square footage cost and change the ratio to 60-40 or something like that, right? You can do the math on it.
But if we expand the library space, the perceived understood based on the contract agreement, they haven't expressed any change in ratios that anybody's aware of.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
David?
Yes, thank you. I did serve
microphone.
I did serve with Dan on the Museum and Archives Committee, and I am on his bandwagon. I do think the option of moving the Miller Art Museum, like to the Yonkers building, it is certainly worth looking at. We were told initially it couldn't be moved. Now we're told yes, it can. They don't like the move, but I think that there's some benefit to a cultural center or something in that aspect there. The foundation should look at that. Certainly, when we need space in the library, we really need that. That's the most common sense approach. And looking at archives, as what Susan said, it was really difficult to determine the amount of archives countywide. Space might be needed for. So we need to figure out some of this, get some ideas as those plans develop or the need develops. It might need more space and take our time with it.
Thank you. Megan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few things. As Nissa stated earlier, she and I serve on library board along with representation from the city. So I feel like there's a couple of misconceptions that have been made as statements on the floor that possibly Ken or Tina would be able to set straight if that's something that we want to do. But the city most definitely there are representation from the city that is very aware of what is happening and what has been happening. So know that, please. There is also another group that was meeting prior to COVID on a regular basis and was going through needs assessments and collecting information. And as far as I know, that is not dead in the water, but has been stalled out because of COVID. So there is more information to be had. A lot of the things that are being questioned, those things have already been addressed or are being addressed. It's really, they're good questions. Don't get me wrong, they most definitely are, but don't think that they aren't things that we haven't thought about. So then again, going back to and taking a look at what's being discussed regarding the partnership between the Miller and the library, there's a lot more information to be had there as well. And there are other reasons and a lot of discussions that have happened that aren't just as cut and dried as they might seem on whether or not we are going to continue to be in the same building or not. So I would just warn against oversimplification in this case around that relationship when we're taking a look at what the plan is going to be. Yeah.
Thanks, Megan. Vinny?
Okay, I am not on any of those committees or on the city council, obviously, so I appreciate the perspectives from multiple areas. But the thing when I look at this entirely is I'm not sure where the leadership will be housed in making a decision on this because it's multiple committees and it's multiple spaces around the city as well, and it involves the city and the county. So when I look at all the plans together, I'm a little bit overwhelmed because there's different information. So if you look at page 131, and I think it's just because of this dynamic I described, if you look at replacement for 4.6 million versus replacement for 2.9 million, one is 10,000 square feet, one is 5,000 square feet. But then we hear that Youth Connections would like 3,000 square feet. So in the second option, does the other 2,000 go to archives? I think some of that detail is just hard to decipher between multiple years of multiple building plans. And so what I would like to know is, like, moving forward whenever we can, is what is the needed square footage for expansion of the museum? But we said the museum maybe wouldn't expand if we did the Yonkers building, but then the Yonkers building doesn't have the gift shop and the other entities that the museum, I'm assuming, identified they wanted when they drew the plan. So where does that fall? So square footage needed for museum expansion, and then square footage for archives, which I know I'm being repetitive, but is the museum going to house the archives as well as the Yonkers building as well as the library, or is there just going to be all the archives in Durham County besides the satellite spots in this new archives place? So what square footage is needed for that? Then moving on to library expansion. If the archives are moved out of the library, how much expansion would they like? And I think they don't know because there's multiple ideas. There's the 1-story, the 2-story, which is, 8,000 square feet or 16,000 square feet, or 4,000 or 8,000 is a difference again. And then also moving on, Youth Connections. What is the minimum they'd like? What's the maximum they'd like? Looking ahead, as this may take 5 to 10 years, where would that program be in 10 years? Then the Miller expansion, because on the library bid, it also shows that they'd like to expand. So I'm assuming part of the library expansion includes the Miller. So sorry, that's a big, long statement, but that's why I'm having a hard time deciphering any of this because it's so many different square footages and buildings all over.
Just for one thing, to help one part of it, if you look at the description of those 3 options, so the one is the archive and Youth Connection. That's the 10,000 square feet. What they did on that last option at 5,000 is actually dropping the Youth Connection. In other words, they said if you just want to do the archive. And the reason it changes a little bit in terms of the square footage is how they organize the space. So just in general, the Youth Connection is, again, in the full drawing, it's about 3,000 square feet plus the shared kitchen and restrooms. So you're probably looking at about 4,000 square feet. The archives are drawn at 6.
So the green block is the archives, not the Youth Connection on page 131.
Again, there's 2 different options. So,
yeah.
So the one that has replacement for the 4.66 at the 10,000 square feet still houses both.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the committee asked, though, what if we didn't do the Youth Connection? Then they said, okay, let's just do the archives only. That's that little small, that's that third option at the 2.93.
And I guess I just didn't know why they needed 2,000 square less feet for archives, because I'm assuming if, the 4.6 option was 3,000 and 7,000, maybe the shared kitchen is gone or something like that.
It just varies on how you can lay out the room and the space and the programming requirements. So you're going to have a little bit of variation. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Susan?
I think there's one other document. If I'm remembering, when I was early on county board, we were asked to fill out a museum survey with regard to what was our vision for this museum, how would we like to see the community use it, stuff like that. So I think that's a document that's around here somewhere that shares the vision of the community for the museum, not just archives, but just in general. And then the other piece is to go along with what Vinny is saying. I'm having a hard time too coming up with how the mechanism works, or what mechanism we have to come up with all of the stakeholders involved in a decision. So we got to spend some time thinking about that, how to get them together.
Okay. Can I say one statement?
Sure, right.
So, one of the things that we talk about at the staff level, again, it's been brought up multiple times, would just be, okay, how do we get that vision? And would you bring on someone to do that? But in essence, it's almost like a master plan. But again, I guess what our biggest fear was is to bring that forward. I mean, it's a good discussion to have, but if you truly want to do that, you're probably looking at $80,000 to $100,000 to do that type of a study. And I guess what I was concerned about, you're gonna say, well, Ken, you did a study in 2011, Ken, you just did a study in 2019, what are you doing, Ken, and now? Although the county didn't spend the money, the foundation spent the money in the library study, and I don't know how much that was, but okay, that money was spent. So I was just worried about the perception, and if we need to do that, they can be successful, but I just want to have, and again, that could be money well spent versus making the wrong decision on a $6 million project, right? But again, it's just getting that level of comfort and having this discussion here saying, okay, I understand how complex this is. It is worth doing a master plan study, but I wanted to have that discussion here first. So you don't see that we're just throwing money in the wind on these other things. But it's just hard to say, hey, I want $100,000 to do this study. We just did 2 studies. I think what it is this whole, I call it the campus, but this whole vision of this area of what we do. So we can go on that path. I just want to give you a context of what that might cost. So,
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the ideas or options or ideas was to move the Miller Art Museum to a different location. And often when people do donations, when Gerhard and his wife donated that $50,000, often that involves tax write-off or something. Has Tina or our attorney or the city attorney looked into any strings attached to that? Maybe it even can't be moved. It depends on what was said. Or did the Gerhard and his wife just give the $50,000 and say, this is part of the wing for the art museum? Has that been looked into from years ago? What the actual document says?
No.
Hasn't been looked at?
No. And I think what Ken's getting at is we need some general direction from the county board, because there are probably 75 different directions we could go. And maybe I'll be the one that speaks most frankly. The county board has the biggest hammer in this because we pay for most of this, whether it's the library, whether it's a museum, whether it's the archives. And you can say what you want about the library board having authority. If it doesn't get money from the county, if the county doesn't make the decision to continue the museum as is, there's nothing the library board can say about that. So I don't want to create any misinformation or misperceptions here. The county is a driving force behind all of this. And I think we need, in my opinion, and I've been involved with it to one extent or another, the 21 people here are the ones that are going to drive the initial decision making. It's not saying you can't involve all the other partners down the road, but until we come up with an overarching vision of what the library is going to look like, what the museum is going to look like, what the archives are going to look like, and what we may or may not do with the former Yonkers building, I don't know that there's too much else that makes sense to do.
No, but my point was, Grant, that if the library could expand into where the Miller Art Museum is, so they'd have to move the Miller Art Museum. And if there were no strings attached that when the Millers donated that money, that they didn't say that it had to stay there or in the building, or there's nothing there.
Even if there was something there, we would be able to get around it because, again, the county that happened many years ago. Back in
the 70s.
And this thing has morphed beyond what anybody imagined it to be. And you hate saying this because it comes across as almost a threat, but if everybody wants to go back to what we were doing in 72, great. But as Ken is saying, we're contributing $60,000 to and we're doing that voluntarily. It's not, I can say with almost certainty, it's not because of any ties to the initial donation. But you're correct. At some point, we need to go back, and we may need to go back to the heirs or assignees of the donors and say, the original vision was for the Miller Art Museum to be in this location. What do you think about it going to another location? That's a possibility.
Well, but Dan said what he wanted to do with the Market Square. That was donated property, and there were strings attached that it had to stay that way. That you couldn't just put buildings on there and stuff. I think it was originally the skating rink and stuff years ago. And I forget the guy that donated it, but there were restrictions on that.
Okay, we're getting very long, and This is just a concept discussion we're having, so we're not going to nail it down today. So hopefully we can keep the rest of the comments short, concise, and then move forward and come back some other time with our ideas. Laura.
Just one other question, if we possibly could look at pulling out what it would cost us to demolish the Yonkers building. Is it with it, and I'm just throwing that out there too, just separating the cost of not rebuilding right away, say we're 2021 or 2022, there's a lot of stakeholders here, and look at options for the county. And that might be the first step, and that's the stepping stone. And I think the county board might want to see just that number alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm definitely in the category of getting this broader than narrower, but just wondering out loud about potential city involvement or city. I realize we want part of the office building or part of that space for archives, but since it's a quite large building, and if we don't want, what I'm responding to is this notion that, you know, I understand facilities says, well, we don't want to get into the rental business, but maybe that part of the building is sold to the city. I don't know. Maybe the city has an interest in doing that part of it or whatever. But anyway, for another time.
We had that discussion.
Okay.
Vinny.
I understand the idea of not coming back with a master plan for $80,000 to $100,000. It sounds like a lot, and it's been done. Some of them are in here, but I'm wondering if there's any way we could do something with, and maybe you're doing this, but joint committee meetings and have like a scheduled goal. Because I'm trying to get to what you're asking us, which is for some direction. But I think we don't know what direction to go in without some more information from what these stakeholders would like. And I think it's just because the plans have come over such a variety of years and there's so many new options being thrown in that we need a group to work on it. I don't know what to say for you to do based on what I see. Thank you.
Can I say just one comment, and I'll keep it brief, but on some of this, I'm going to go with Grant, kind of be blunt without trying to be mean. But at some point we have silos built too, and we're not going to get past those silos unless we get some higher authority making those decisions. So, for example, the library wants their library space. Museum, the Miller Art Museum doesn't want to move. Those are all things that they want, but those are not things that guide us in terms of decisions, in terms of what's the best thing to come together. So I guess that's where we've been struggling. We've had stakeholder groups. We have individual meetings with the library board, the other board. We've had a joint meeting with all those and stakeholders. A lot of those have occurred. We have all those meetings that have occurred, but it's come to the point where there's still, and it's not negative silos. It's just what they're saying and what their desires are. But at some point in time, you need something above all that to say, hey, those are some really things, but we still can accomplish 90% of what your vision is and all your programming and all that. So I think this works better long-term, I think. So that's where we're struggling.
And does Facilities and Parks Committee, like, would they be a place to come up with something, and it's no offense, but just more consolidated than this? Because this still kind of is like all the silos mushed together. But I guess I don't see how we can do that right now or in this setting. Yeah, thank you.
Susan.
So I'm going to suggest that this goes back to Facilities and Parks. I mean, this may seem like we were all over the board today, and we were, but I learned things about what you were all thinking. And what we also did was we gave all kinds of background to the people that haven't seen all these steps so that if we ever get to a decision, they will have some basis for making it. So I think Facilities and Parks brainstorms what are the next steps, what in terms of sifting through, involving stakeholders, whatever it might be, and comes back to the county board with some sort of recommendation for a direction. I don't mean deciding what to do with the buildings. I just mean the process. How do we move forward?
Karen?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to speak to the general overview of priorities because I feel like that's where you might have wanted us to go in the beginning. And I am strongly interested in the whole of the project. Even how you called it a campus is amazing to me. I think it's super important for the entirety of the community to have this kind of public space. And I would want everyone to maybe think, I just learned this term of imagining before thinking. So imagining what could be before you come up with, the more specifics. And I think that a campus or all of the things together or separate, but just having the space it provides like an equity issue too for people that might not have internet access or might not have the community spaces that everybody uses. And that makes me really excited to have that sort of community spaces. And it's an asset to everyone. So I feel like this is a priority and it's a really cool thing to talk about. I don't know if anybody has seen Austin's library, but like the library is so amazing and different. So like it could be a focal point. Anyway, that's my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave?
There are a lot of moving targets on this discussion. I would have liked to have the discussion actually back when we were looking at the Yonkers building. Put a lot of things into context then. There are too many variables, and you're right. This is a big shift in the nature of what we are in this neighborhood. Personally, when I thought about it 4 months ago, I like the idea of the Miller Art Museum section being brought out in order to where the Yonkers property is, not necessarily in that building, but to me, the thought in that direction helps you start to reconfigure the library's interests, the other space, the parking spaces that we need and that stuff. And it is one of the variables that, I find it difficult to believe that any part of the agreement for $50,000 of space was tied to it forever being perpetually in that physical location. That would be unusual if you find it not that way. So for me, I'd be in favor of starting to narrow some of those pieces down, and that being one of them. Taking that space and probably giving them additional space over at the Yonkers property. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean using the existing building that as part of it. That's one of the variables that are still up in the order.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. Biz?
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we're trying to get through this special reports thing, but I think maybe at this point it's time that maybe we can deal with Resolution 2020-52, the disposition of the 442 Michigan Street. The Finance Committee has already talked about this, and their recommendation is to take up to $20,000 out of the contingency expense, the bids maybe are no good anymore. But what the low bid was $16,000 something. So I guess if it's okay to make it at this time.
We still have somebody that wants to speak to the current. We haven't moved to that resolution yet, Biz.
Okay.
We have one more comment, and we can go that direction.
Okay. Thank you.
Megan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on an idea that Kara had presented, we really went into this, and I will repeat, this stalled out a few months ago because of COVID. Okay, that there would be more work done on this already otherwise. So yes, I agree that we need to look at it from a really broad scope. We were approaching it as a group, taking a look, broad scope at the partnership between the Miller and the library, and really trying to think big and dream, taking a look at what Egg Harbor and the Crest have had, what they've created, what that has become in that community, and how they've been able to use donor dollars. That is a huge piece of that thinking bigger type of concept between the library and the museum and the Miller, all as a cultural space. That's all part of this conversation. And I can speak confidently to the fact that if the library board was going to come forward with any sort of recommendation at this time, it is to not shun that partnership with the Miller. And that's unofficial right now, but we've had a lot of discussions on it, and that's currently where the library board sits. So please take that into consideration, that there is a lot more information out there that you are not aware of that has not been discussed. And that can be brought forward, but before you go ahead and start making decisions on it, please keep that in mind.
Thank you. Okay, so you know what you're going to do? Sure. Well, thank you everyone for the discussion. Of course, that's what we need. That's why we have reports. That's how we get everybody's input, and I'm sure we'll be hearing about this in the future. So let's go to the outstanding resolution, which is the disposition of 442 Michigan Street property in number 281-10-852-62502. Dan.
I'd like to make that motion to approve.
Biz wants to second it, right?
I'll second.
You want to make a motion, but whatever.
Well, it doesn't matter. I just wanted to get through this discussion. Does it have to be rebid?
No, it's a current bid with all the pricing, but it's not to exceed 20,000 because the bid is, I think, 16 something, and there's also asbestos removal. So the request is to remain under $20,000.
Because we rebid it since the last time when you were on the committee, we had the bids and they rebid it and came back pretty much the same as the previous bids. The low bid was somebody else.
Yeah, it's 16,477.50, and then the abatement was 28.26. So that's under the $20,000. So,
Megan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel like last time that this property came up and that we were discussing it, there we were, yes, looking at the possibility of it being used with social services. I understand that that's not a possibility. There was also a discussion and a bit of buzz of possibly saving the structure because of historical value. Have those discussions, I haven't heard anything about those in quite some time. Have those discussions continued about that building having historical value for Sturgeon Bay?
The only thing that we've had one comment, and I don't know if it's a formal statement by the Sturgeon Bay Historical Society or by the individual itself that was interested in trying to preserve the building. But other than that, there's been no other discussion on that.
So no further follow through from when was that last comment?
I think that was when we did the first set of bids. There was the comments when we received the bids in terms of those comments.
And that was in which month?
It was last year. My guess would have probably been early, sometime during the summer.
Okay.
I know we held off with the raising in the building.
Right, exactly. So I wanted to get a clearer picture of how long that we've held off on that raising.
Correct.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
This is a reminder. This one's a 2/3 majority, super majority, 14.
Right, we will move to the voter board.
I'm trying to connect. There we go.
That is passed and a vote of 19 yea, 1 nay, 1 absent. New business, oral committee reports. Any oral committee reports from anybody? Any review of committee minutes? Claims or bills? Announcements. Our next regular county board meeting is July 28th at 9 a.m. I'd also remind you or ask, has anybody been doing the Monday morning cows, CWS? Okay, all right, good. Because I think there's one left. I think Monday's the last one. The meeting per diem code is 623. Susan.
I just wanted to make one comment that if the new folks aren't aware of the value of looking at the annual reports, if you read all of them, you will have a very good, you'll have a very good experience with a kind of understanding what the county does. It's really worth the read. And, if you have a hard time falling asleep, you can do a few before you go to bed every night. I'm being facetious. It really is a valuable document.
Yeah.
You should think about it.
And to that effect, the RPC ones are usually quite detailed. Those reports, monthly reports and that stuff to look at too, as to why the decisions were made the way they were.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there's no further business to be transacted today, I'd like to make a motion, we adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.